everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. I'm Hannah Hodge with Springfield Community Gardens, a nonprofit based in Springfield, Missouri, whose vision is a community where everyone has access to healthy and local food. This workshop on troubleshooting your compost questions is generously supported by the 2501 grant from the USDA Department of Partnerships and Public Engagement. Our speaker tonight is the board president of the Springfield Compost Collective, Justine Francesca, and I'll let her introduce herself further in a moment. Some housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions throughout the night, please ask as we go. We are super welcome to any questions you may have. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in which you can ask a question. And if you have like a very pertinent question, you can also raise your hand and we will unmute you so that we can see what you have to say during the presentation. And we'll stop periodically to chat with Justine about the questions that you may have. So feel free to reach out if so. There's also a chat feature at the bottom of the comments that you can use if the Q&A button is for some reason not working. Thank you to everyone who submits questions ahead of time so that we can kind of timely submit the questions as the workshop is developing. Also, once you leave this workshop, a screen will pop up with a link to a post-workshop survey. This survey is used in Springfield Community Gardens reporting to the USDA and also helps us provide meaningful workshops in the future. We really, really appreciate it if you would take a couple of minutes to fill that out for the workshop. There will also be a poll that I am submitting. So if you guys could do the poll sooner than later, that would be super helpful. If you would like to refer to this workshop later, it'll be available on Springfield Community Gardens Agriculture Workshop playlist on our YouTube channel by the end of the week. I'll put that link as well as our website, social media, and tonight's exit survey in the chat once Justine gets started. But that's it from me. So I'm going to hand it over to Justine.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here. Springfield Community Gardens has a very dear place in my heart, and they're doing amazing things for the community of Springfield. Their farmer incubator program is incredible. Their farmers, I mean, they're just top notch. Springfield is super lucky to have a nonprofit and a program like what they are producing. And the Compost Collective is so excited and grateful to be a part of that with them. So it looks like we have 8 people in attendance. I would love to give some time for a couple more people to sign on here in a couple minutes. So while we wait, I would love for everyone to answer those polls. Hopefully we launched that already. Let's see. Hannah, did we launch the poll? Oh, only want me to do it?
Yes, yeah, the poll is there down at the bottom.
Okay, I would love to know if these are like first time attendees and like some situations that you have going on. So please fill that out and then I can get some information from you. So I'm going to share my screen now and we can get started. Okay. Wonderful. So I'm with Springfield Compost Collective. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Compost Collective and then we'll dive into composting world. Our mission is to create mindfulness around food waste and the recycling process through composting and soil education. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. A little bit about myself. I'm a mom to a 2-year-old now. He's not in that cute little baby phase anymore. I attended MSU for Sustainable Agriculture and Plant Science. Once I finished up at MSU, I moved out to California and managed a 3-acre permaculture farm where I currently am right now for this presentation. I'm a master gardener. I've done Kiss the Ground soil advocacy courses, Dr. Elaine Ingham's, all of her soil food web certifications. I worked for the Springfield Community Gardens, was in AmeriCorps Vista, and I've just done lots of other certifications. After I finished with school, I became really obsessed with soil and compost and kind of dove into that world and did as much certification education that I could. And still to this day, I love learning about it, and I'm trying to stay up to date with it and be a part of the composting world throughout the whole country as best I can. The Compost Collective, what we do, we are composting food scraps, regenerating soils through building mindful waste management in Springfield, Missouri. We do this through offering residential service, education, workshops, and free community bins. We have a food scraps pickup service. So after this workshop, if it feels like, oh my gosh, this is just too much, I can't do composting, there's always another option, which is we'll pick it up for you. And when you subscribe to our service, it helps support our nonprofit. It helps support our free education workshops, our community bins, and it also is helping us pave the way to greener jobs in Springfield. And we do offer it to businesses as well. We've worked with the public school, private school, MSU, Drury, community gardens. We love doing educational workshops. Our community food scrap bins, we have 3 locations. This is for people, individuals who cannot afford our service. We want to make sure that we give everyone access to composting no matter what. So we have these free community bins located throughout the town that have been sponsored, which is wonderful. We're one of the only composting nonprofits in the nation to offer this. And we also do zero waste events. So if you're getting ready to have any sort of event and you're thinking, you know what, I really would like this to be a zero waste event, we can help you do that. And we come to that event and take all your food scraps and compostables off-site for you. So when we're talking about composting, I love to just give this little intro, because it really, for me, this is like what grabs people in and thinks, you know, I can do this because this is what's good for the earth, and it kind of motivates you. One of the things that really motivates me was this question, is how long does it take for a lettuce head to decompose in the landfill? And just kind of think about it for a little bit, you know, like come up with the number in your head and like think, okay, I know this is it. I know this is the number. And the real number is 25 years. And just to let you know, like, this is what kind of motivates all of us at the Compost Collective, is because we really believe that we can create a system where we get food waste out of the landfill and into a system where it decomposes in 1 to 2 weeks. And it's giving us a product that we can give back to our community to make our soil and foods healthier. The reason why it takes so long in a landfill environment is because it's an anaerobic environment. And it has bacteria in there that take a very long time to decompose organic material. And that's not where it's supposed to be. And we're going to go over all that in this workshop. So some local numbers of Springfield. Right now, it's currently producing 850 to 1,200 tons of waste per day. 12% of that is food waste, which is about 120 tons every day. And it's kind of hard to think of those very large numbers. So we put it into something that a little bit more simpler. It's equivalent to about 60 cars driving into the landfill every day to park forever. And this is something that we want to stop. We feel that we can do this. We can convert that into usable compost to give back to the gardeners and the farmers. So right now we operate in a broken system, which you can see here on the left, and we really want to go to that closed loop system, and that's what we're working towards. This is our ultimate goal here, is the closed loop of community composting, where we work really closely with the farmers and the local markets and the residents and businesses, and we are getting that food scraps composted to give back to the gardeners and community farmers. So let's talk about composting. I have a list of the questions that were submitted before the workshop, but please feel free throughout the workshop to send in your questions to Hannah, and I will stop and see what questions are going. And then I really want this to be a like back and forth workshop where if there's something that you just want to tell me, instead of type it out in the chat, please raise your hand. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm here to help you gain confidence in composting. So all questions are good questions. Please ask away. I'm here for you for the next hour and a half. So let's get started. What is compost? Compost is the decomposition of organic matter in an aerobic setting, so in an oxygen setting. I like to say that it's the natural recycling process that gives life and energy back to the earth. So one of the questions that was asked was about what is the difference between dirt, soil, and compost? And this was a great question. And I don't know if you're on here, whoever asked that question, but thank you so much. I love that was asked, because now I'm like, you know what? I need to incorporate this into my workshops more, because this is a big deal, this separation between these three. So dirt in the science world is really anything is soil that is out of place. That is dirt. So you get dirt on your shoes when you walk into your house. That's dirt. Also, to other soil scientists and individuals like me, is dirt is dead. And it's kind of easy to remember that. So we try not to use the word dirt. Dirt means that it doesn't have a lot of microorganisms in it. It's dry. It's the soil that you lift up and then like completely just like dust in your hand. That is dirt. Now, compost is a composition of materials that has decomposed together to create a habitat that thrives with beneficial microorganisms and is alive. And then soil is alive, and it's made up of sand, silt, and clay particles that can hold and grow plants. So the biggest difference right here is dirt is dead, soil is alive. Compost is the process of creating this beautiful environment where it's making sure that all the microorganisms are thriving in it, right? I hope this answers the question. And if you have any other questions about the difference, please feel free to ask me. So before we move on, how are we feeling about what I just went over? Is there any questions?
Justine, there was one more question. When do you use topsoil versus compost?
Yes, that's at the very end of the slide of the workshop, but I can go ahead and tell you that now. So topsoil, in those industries, it can be, it's kind of what it says. It's like someone found a piece of land and they scooped up all the topsoil and put it into a pile. Now they're going to sell that topsoil, right, as either fill or they sell it as topsoil because they're claiming that it's a little bit more alive and better than just regular fill. So I think it needs to be like in context, right? And we'll say the context is gardening. So if you have a raised bed where you want to fill it, and say it's a 2-foot raised bed, well, first off, I always tell people that you should never fill your raised bed with just topsoil and compost. You can, but over time, what can happen is that it just decomposes really quickly and can get really compacted sometimes, depending on the type of topsoil you had. So the best thing to do in a gardening setting when you're filling a raised bed is to put in lots of different organic matters like mulches and some leaves, and then put in some of your topsoil and put in some of your compost and kind of keep layering it up. And then make sure that the top like 5 to 8 inches of your bed is just compost. Really good, like smells really good, completely decomposed compost. And then those microorganisms that are in that top level will move themselves down through the bed and start decomposing all the other organic matter. And it also allows for a lot of air space in between, a lot of, because the mulch and the leaves and it's all not compact. So as it's decomposing, which you'll get faster decomposing this rate as well, because you have all these air spaces and it won't get so just smushed down over time from rain. So, you know, you don't have to buy just one or the other if you don't want to. Like, you can buy a little bit of topsoil and you can buy a little bit of compost and you can mix them together and put them in your garden. It's all about like a time and a place and how much money you have. If you can afford to just buy a lot of compost for your beds, that's always the route that I like to go, because I'm never sure on what was in the topsoil that I'm purchasing. And sometimes you can get topsoil that has heavy metals in it, is contaminated, and can hurt your garden. The same can go for compost too. So it's really important to kind of ask your processor who you're purchasing from, what goes in it, you know, see if you can see their testing with that. They're supposed to be able to give you, you know, they have to test their compost, and they can show you that if you ask. So yeah, I hope that answered. If you have any more clarifications on like a certain situation that you're trying to figure out how you should, please let me know and I can help you out a little bit more. So materials needed to start composting at home. Before I get into this, do we have some answers to that poll, to the poll questions?
It doesn't look as though we do, but the poll is open if anybody would like to answer the questions. They're just very basic questions on whether or not you're composting, if you've already attended a composting workshop, and if you have any worries or concerns. So please use the poll if you can, y'all.
Yes. This helps me tell me if I would like to know if I have people who are already composting in the workshop, and if I need to go, or if I have people who've never composted before, so I kind of know where I should direct things. But until I know, I'll just kind of start from the top. So materials needed to start composting at home. I try to go the most simplest route so anybody can compost, right, with the littlest amount of money. And that requires pallets. So recycle, they're heat treated. You want to look for a little symbol on the pallet that looks like a little tree, and it should say HT, and it means it's heat treated. We don't want to get chemical treated pallets, because over time those chemicals can leach into the compost pile and it can kill the microorganisms that you were trying to grow. Chicken wire or hardware cloth, they'll line the pallets so nothing seeps through those big gaps. Cardboard for the very bottom of the pile. And we're going to go over all this. I have pictures for you and videos to show you how this all comes together. You're going to need your carbon, which is your mulch, paper, leaves, and then your nitrogen materials. I always recommend a pitchfork. It's the easiest thing to turn the compost pile. A compost thermometer. And then I like to do a carbon and nitrogen storage area, which we'll go over. So caution with this style. And the reason is because composting takes a lot of oxygen, right? We're trying to grow the bacteria that are aerobic, and they require oxygen around them. These are the happy guys. The oxygen microorganisms are the ones that produce like that wonderful smell after it rains, or when you put your hand in the forest floor and you're like, oh my gosh, this smells so good. Those are the good guys. Now, if you stick your hand in the compost pile, like, oh my gosh, this smells like vinegar, or it's really stinky. Those are the anaerobic guys, and those are there because there's a lack of oxygen in the pile. So these bins, in my experience, tend to lean on the anaerobic side. Right, they don't have a very good air circulation ability within the bin. Now, if this is the only bin you're allowed to use, say you live in a neighborhood where they don't allow open aerated bins, then you can use this. Just know that you really need to have a very hands-on approach with your compost pile. You need to go out there at least twice a day, and you need to my poll popped up. 1 second. shut that. Okay. You need to just make sure that you're turning it a lot and you're being really interactive with your compost pile. So yeah, that's all I'll say about these. Is just be very cautious, and I'll show you what to look for. So anaerobic bacteria, like I said, the smelly bad guys, lack of oxygen, not enough airflow. Sometimes it means that the nitrogen to carbon ratio is too high, and that's why these guys will start to pop out a lot. But it can be fixed. And I have a video here that I'm going to show you what it looks like when you come in contact with anaerobic bacteria, so you know. And
compost turning is an activity
yeah,
for all family members to get involved in. Yeah. Okay, I wanted to show you guys the signs of an anaerobic pile. So right here, you can kind of see this white. And this is a sign that the pile is starting to go anaerobic, starting to get a lack of oxygen, which I knew was going to happen because we didn't turn it as much as we should. So when we incorporate some more water and turn it, we can get some of the aerobic bacteria back in here and take care of this.
Okay, so I hope you kind of saw all those little white speckly like things in the compost pile. That is the sign of anaerobic. And when you come into that contact in your pile, you can really smell it. But like it says in here, this can be fixed. Oh, sorry for the dogs barking, the farm dogs. You just have to turn the pile and the good guys will come in and outcompete with the bad guys. All right, let's go to the next one.
Compost turning is an activity.
So location of the pile. These are like ideal situations. If you don't have the ideal situation, it's totally okay. The ideal situation is that it's partial sun and shade. You're considering the wind because you don't want to put it in a super windy spot if you can avoid it. You want it as close to your garden area as possible if you do have one, so that it encourages you to use it and like interact with it as much as you're interacting with your garden. And you want it to be, you don't want it to be really close. You don't want to be too far from your house. The biggest mistake I see with people is that they'll put their compost pile at the very back end of their yard because they don't want to, like, they think it's going to be smelly or ugly or gross. If that's the case, then yes, you can compost in the cold setting, and putting it all the way in the back of your yard is probably the best way to go. But right now we're talking about hot composting and getting compost the fastest way that you can. And you want that to be closer to your home so you can easily walk out there and interact with it. And then you also need access to water because you do have to water your compost pile, and level ground as well. This was a video of, here, we'll play a little bit of it here. A video of the community, the farm, community gardens farm, the market farm. It may look different now. This was a few years ago, but I love their setup for a farm setting. This is much, much bigger for like a backyard grower. And I have some options to show you guys for just a backyard grower. But these like multiple bin system is really nice for turning and keeping track of your compost pile, and having it all really neat and tidy and close together is really nice as well. The more you make your composting area an interactive place where it looks nice and it's organized, the more you're going to want to go out there and turn your compost. They have their sifter right next to the very final stage, which is always a great idea. So you don't have to be lugging it around too much. And then on the very back end, they had an area where they're collecting sticks that are too big to go into a pile. And then they have their finished product, which they put a tarp on the ground, which is very important so that your finished product doesn't just leach all the way into the ground. So yeah, and then you can see their garden in the back and how close it is to their garden, which I thought was ideal. Okay, so materials needed for a healthy compost pile, like we said, nitrogen, carbon, air, and water. And then cold versus hot. So one of the questions we got, which was, how long does it take, I believe, to get a finished product? And that depends on how much work you want to put into your compost. So if you want to do cold composting where you just put it in your backyard and you just pile it on whenever you get a chance. It's going to take about, to be honest with you, at least a year to 2 years for you to get a finished product. It may take even longer than that. You may get like, you know, squash and different type of things growing out of your compost pile, which could make you getting a finished product even longer. So here is some like, there's benefits to both and there's downfalls to both. Now, hot composting produces compost the fastest, which you can get in about 1 to 3 months, but it requires a lot of turning and a lot of like going and checking on it and making sure that it's maintained and problem solving. But I promise that once you interact with your compost pile for like 3 months and you find your finished product where you're like, oh my gosh, I just made compost in a month. I took it from mulch and veggie scraps, and now look at it. It's this crumbly, beautiful compost. You're gonna get addicted. Like it's the greatest feeling. It's like you're, you know, growing a little animal. It's so much fun to watch you produce this beautiful product that's going to heal your soils. So I really encourage everyone to at least try to hot compost once. Hot compost is also the way that you're going to decompose your seeds in your garden properly, or any plants that may have pathogens or disease on them. And that's because we're going to get that compost pile up to 150 to 160 degrees. And at that temperature for 7 days, it's going to kill weed seeds and pathogens. And we'll go into that a little bit more. How are we doing so far?
Good. I wanted to let you know that it looks like 80% of the listeners are composting at home. And the number one, 40% of our listeners, the number one concern with composting is not doing it correctly or lack of know-how. And another 40% is, do I have enough materials, meaning greens and browns, to compost correctly?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And then are these mostly new? Has anyone attended my workshops before?
30% have attended before.
Okay, awesome. Well, cool. So if you've attended this before, then you've probably seen I kind of use the same material over and over, because compost, it's just that it's a thing that is, I want to be very simple. Okay, well, let's keep going. It's good to know these. Thank you for answering that. So when you're building a compost pile, there is scientific evidence that it has to be a certain size. And the minimum size that it can be is 3 by 3 by 3. And this is 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. And this is because it shows that when the pile is that size, it actually can protect itself from outside elements, being too much rain, snow, winds, sometimes drought. And so what I recommend people do is a 4 by 4 by 4. And most pallet systems are 4 feet. So when you build a pallet system, like the one I showed in the very first image, you're going to accomplish that 4 by 4 by 4. And that's because it protects itself. And one of the questions, can you read question 4 for me, Hannah?
Question 4, give me one moment. Let's see. How does weather affect your compost?
Okay, so weather can affect it if it's not 4 by 4 by 4, if it's not this size where it can protect itself, it can be affected by the weather. So it is nice to have it covered. Now, whatever cover you put over it while you're slowly building it up to this size, you just want to make sure you're not just laying a tarp directly on top of it, because you can make it go anaerobic that way. What I always tell people is like, roll up some chicken wire, into like at least a foot or 2, put it on top of the pile, and then put your tarp over it, or build like a little roof over your structure. But once it gets, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. The other question is, can you add too much compost to your garden?
Oh, is that what from which question? What number was that?
Number 3.
Oh, okay. I think I have that in the slide. I don't believe you can add too much compost. It's a very expensive product. So if I'd say that every year, if you can add, 1 to 2 inches and you can afford that, that is the way to go. I don't think it's necessary. It also depends on the quality of compost that you get. If you get compost that is lacking life in it, then you will need to apply more of it. But if you get compost where it smells really good, it has that dark chocolate color to it, and if you have access to a microscope, or you can send in the compost to my friend, which we'll talk about later, and he can analyze it for you and tell you that you have a balanced microbial life in it, then you don't need that much of it. So no, you cannot, I don't believe you can add too much, but also I don't think it's necessary to add a large amount either. Now, you can add too much compost if it's contaminated, and that it has been an issue lately, is that I have seen compost completely destroy market gardens and farms because it was contaminated by a pesticide or an herbicide. And that's normally found in composters who take large amounts of like horse manure, because those horses are treated with like deworming medicine, and deworming medicine kills microorganisms, and so it's very strong as well. They're noticing that it sometimes doesn't break down in the heating process, and so they're trying to figure out and do some more experimenting with it. So it is important when you're thinking about purchasing compost in a large amount to really ask those questions of, do you take horse manure? Do you make sure that there is no herbicides or pesticides that can contaminate the pile? Like what's the ratio of how much you take versus like how much you're not taking and you're supplementing with carbon? So there are questions to be asked there.
Justine, we have a question in the Q&A.
Yes.
Josh Welch asks, when starting a raised bed or hugelkultur,
yes,
should compost be mixed with topsoil or only added on top?
Both. That would be, I always like to, and I'll show you when we're building the compost pile. So compost is an inoculant, right? Because really good compost has tons of protozoa, nematodes, fungal strands, amoebas. It's just packed full of all these microorganisms. So if you can layer them in with just a little inoculant at each layer, your hugelkultur bed is going to break down faster because you're going to start working on those carbon materials. When you put it on the top layer of your bed, right? The best thing I've seen and what they're showing now is that compost is best with living roots in it. So if you put, 3 to 4 inches of compost on your bed, you directly want to plant your seeds or your transplants into it, and you want to keep it moist, right? Because you'll see later on that the microorganisms, they have a little film of water around them, and that cannot dry out, or else they go dormant or they die. So you want to keep your compost moist as best you can, and living roots in it, so that when there's living roots in the soil, in the compost, it will start making more microorganisms, and that symbiotic relationship between the microorganisms and the roots starts to thrive. So I advise both. Now, if you have, you just a little bit of compost, one of the best things to do is that, and you don't think you can put living roots in it right away, is you can put it just on top of your bed, but directly cover it with something, whether it's like some shredded leaves or some really fine mulch, so that it's protected from the sun and the wind and it won't dry out. And so you're keeping your product in the healthiest condition until you can get living roots in it. I hope that helps. And I hope that answered your question. we're going to move on to the next slide because we're going to go over this and everything else. Okay, so out of everything you can take away, this is one of the most important slides right here. Like, take a picture of it, whatever you have to do to memorize it. If you can get this information down, you have composting down, and you will know when there's an issue in your compost pile because you're understanding the science and the relationship to everything inside the pile. And so you'll step back and think, okay, this is an issue. I know that these need this, and this is how to fix it. So let's start with carbon. Carbon is your mulch, your shredded leaves, your brown material, your paper product. It is the energy source for microorganisms. Just like we have carbohydrates that provide us an energy source, the carbon, your mulch material, it fuels the microorganisms' metabolism. Nitrogen provides the proteins and enzymes that the microorganisms need for growth and to reproduce at a rapid rate. Okay, carbon and nitrogen in the pile, they have to be touching each other. They have to be like, you can't have one or the other and be separate areas. That's not composting. That won't work. They have to be layered in on top of each other. Water, everything living needs water. Microorganisms need a water coating around them, like I said earlier, to be able to move throughout the pile and to work efficiently. And then oxygen. And this is to prevent the bad guys from coming in, the anaerobic population, and to help maintain the good guys and to keep the decomposition happening in your pile. One of the main things in all the piles that I've seen all over the place and why they're not decomposing is because they're lacking water. You gotta water your pile. And in Missouri, with all the rain and humidity, like you shouldn't have an issue with how much water you have in your pile, but I'm gonna teach you how to test your pile with your hand to make sure you have the exact amount. So carbon, nitrogen, water, oxygen, these are needed. Here's a little picture of how the water works. So A is dry, right? You can see that there is not a lot of the blue water around. So the microorganisms, you're lacking diversity in the amount of microorganisms that you have around your organic material, and they're not able to move very good, right? And then C, where it's completely watered down, now you're possibly adding in some bacteria and microorganisms that are not good for your pile. In the middle is optimal. Everything has a little coating around it. You have a nice diversity of microorganisms, and they can move quickly throughout the organic material and really start decomposing. Okay, so this is the 50% moisture content hand test. So you want your pile to be at 50% moisture. What that looks like is you take it and you squeeze in your hand, like my friend here from Living Roots Compost, he did, and you squeeze it as hard as you possibly can. And if you have a couple drops of water coming out, you are at 50%, and you want to squeeze really hard. Now, if you squeeze it just a little bit and water is dripping out, you're at like 80%, and you need to add some more carbon into it to start soaking up some of that water because you're getting too much moisture. And the same goes like opposite end. If you squeeze it and nothing's coming out, you need to add water. Kind of like that video I showed you of the anaerobic bacteria earlier. That pile was really dry because it was like super crumbly, and that needed to have water added to it. Okay, how are we doing on questions?
Doing okay on questions. There are a couple of questions that we have in the pile, just that we have pre-made. Like, what are some compost red flags to keep on a lookout for? But I feel like we've answered that.
Well, they're not, I didn't answer them in order. So I will answer them, but they're not all in order. So like this next slide right here is going to answer question 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, 16, and 17.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, no, other than that, we're good on questions. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A.
Okay. So I believe, I can remember, I don't have them in front of me, that all of these questions were pertaining to what can go in the compost pile. And that is always the question, right? Like what can I put in there? What can't I put in there? So when you look up composting, there's always going to be this ratio of 30-1. Everyone's like, you want the ideal ratio of 30-1. Sometimes I feel like that's just the easy way out for composters to tell people, but that's really hard to do. And that's really hard to wrap your head around what 30-1 even means. So it's a carbon to nitrogen ratio is what 30-1 means. And I don't really like to teach that to people because there's a lot of science and math involved to get that ideal. So what I just want you to take away is what's in this little graph right here. Just know that when you're using wood chips, they can be anywhere from 500 to 1200 carbon to nitrogen ratio, right? And then your food scraps are going to be just 25-1 carbon and nitrogen ratio. So what this means that when you look at your wood chips, right, and you got these big chunks and little chunks, that's a high carbon material. So it's going to take quite a bit of nitrogen, your green materials, to decompose, to help those microorganisms decompose that carbon material. So when you're using wood chips, you don't need a super thick layer of them. You just need, like an inch layer of them to like 3 to 4 inches of your food scraps. And leaves are only 80-1. Leaves are a very good carbon source, so you can put in a handful of food waste, and then you can go behind and put a handful of leaves in, and you can keep that all the way up to where your pile reach the tippy top, and you're going to have a really good ratio. But what you're going to lack is diversity in your pile. So if you can, it's really important to try to have leaves, all these different carbon materials, your leaves, your wood chips, your shredded newspaper, your shredded up cardboard materials, and then same with your nitrogen, your green materials. You want to have a big diversity of your food scraps and coffee grounds, and layering it in as best you can, and then keeping it really mixed and turned into your pile, right? So just kind of look over these numbers and kind of see how the ratios, I hope that makes sense. Like you'll see it too, like if you throw in too much carbon material, and you'll see that, oh, well, I still have really big chunks of mulch in my pile. It's not breaking down. That's okay. You can throw in more food scraps, more carbon material, mix it up, get it moist, and over time it will get broken down into soil. The biggest thing here is that you don't want to put in too much nitrogen and too little carbon, because then that's when you start getting bad smells with your ratio being off. I always try to err on the side of a little bit of too much carbon, because you can fix that a lot easier than you can if you have too much green. If you want to go over like real quick 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, 16, like just kind of remind me what each one of those says so I can be sure to answer them.
Totally. Also, we have a question in the Q&A, but I feel like we can answer it by saying the Springfield Compost Collective. Marissa Fraser asks, do you have a recommendation for where to buy compost without risk of harmful contaminants in the Springfield area?
Ooh, that's such a hard question. Even though it's so easy. So currently the Springfield Compost Collective doesn't have a site where we're composting because we haven't raised enough money yet to buy land and to pay people to compost, because it's very expensive. That is our dream goal in the next 5 years, is to be able to have our own education facility where we're composting and doing workshops there. So right now we take our food scraps to Hanson's and Reed Springs, and they compost it for us. So I know in the past they've had some issues, and I believe they're always actively working on trying to make really good compost. So currently I would say that I recommend Hanson's. We are wanting to do we're getting ready to purchase a microscope, and we'll be doing some composting analysis of all the different composting available in Springfield, so you can know what we believe is of good quality. compost is always changing from processors because they're always getting different materials in different piles, right? So you may get a really, really good batch from Hanson's, and then you may get a so-so batch from Hanson's. I always tell people that it's really important when you're purchasing compost is one, that it's open to the air. Even if you get it in the bag should have holes in it and it should be breathing. If the bag is completely closed, do not purchase the compost because now you're breeding bad bacteria and you do not want to put that on your garden and risk hurting your plants. If that's your only option of purchasing that type of compost, you can lay it out on the ground on a tarp and start turning it and try to get it open to the air. And there's microorganisms all throughout, all throughout the air that can come and inoculate it and get it into a better product for you. Just be sure to let it air out for a little bit.
Would you want that in low light or like semi bright light?
Oh, in the shade. Then you want your compost pile to be like your finished product, if you can, in the shade.
Okay.
So, and then the city yard waste facility, they make good compost as well. The only thing that I've noticed that can lack with the city is diversity, because I'm not sure what exactly they're taking anymore as far as nitrogen products. I know that they, open it up to everybody to bring their grass clippings and tree trimmings and such. And I know there's a concern with like pesticides, because if anyone can bring their grass clippings, there's possibility of those grass clippings have chemicals on them. And that is true. So what that just means,
sorry, go on.
What that just means is that you could have a compost that doesn't have a lot of microorganisms in it. But at the same time, what that doesn't mean is that it could be a little bit cleaner, right? Because it's not going to have animal manure in it, and it's not going to have potential really big, like, destroyers of the plant world, right? Over time, from what I have seen, is that herbicides can be diminished with high heat composting. That's what I've seen with some research that is coming out. It's harder to kill the dewormer that are used in horses and livestock in composting piles, because those are made to go through their body, their high heat, multiple stomach body, and stay with them. So I wish I had a really clear answer of go to this company and purchase this, but it goes back and forth, and just know that the price that you are paying is going to be a reflection on the product that you get. Right now, there's some compost being sold that can ship to your house where it's like $75 for a 5-gallon bucket. And that is because the people who are making that can guarantee you that that 5-gallon bucket has an incredible amount of microorganisms that if you took that compost and you put it in like a little sifter and you sifted it out through your whole garden, you would get a higher inoculation of more diversity than you did if you took 3 inches of low grade compost and put it on your pile, right? But you also, when you're getting a little bit, say you're getting lower grade compost, and you are getting organic matter. So that is something to think of too. You're getting wood chips and grass clippings that have decomposed somewhat, and they're giving organic matter to your soil. So I always recommend people, and I'll show you at the very end, this is that if you're really wanting to invest into your lawn or your garden, I would recommend, if you can, purchasing a little bit of the best compost that you could possibly find right now, turning it into compost tea, or ordering a brew kit from one of my friends, I'll tell you, and then putting organic matter all over your garden and inoculating it with compost tea or a small amount of compost, until you can make the compost at home, right? Because you can make the best quality compost in your backyard.
Yeah, so that actually leads into, we have a couple of questions here.
Yes.
Let's see. Celestine Copeland has 2 questions. One, can you make your own compost within city limits, which I would assume that she's referring to Springfield. And then the second question is, how long does it take to make good compost? And is there such a thing as organic plant-based compost?
So organic plant-based compost is going to be in something that you would probably have to make yourself. I'm pretty sure. So you want to look for like there's certain things you need to look for if you want organic certified compost. And that is through the U.S. Compost Council. And then also through the USD Organics certification program. They have standards that you have to meet in order to make sure that your compost is organic. And if you can purchase organic compost, I recommend doing it because it has to go through a strict regimen of heating cycles. It has to stay at a certain temperature for a certain duration to make sure that all bad pathogens and seeds are killed. So definitely investing in certified organic compost is the way to go. As far as plant-based compost, that would be a little bit harder because compost is made for any organism that's coming from the earth, right? Because all things are meant to go back into the earth and decompose, even animals. And so it's one of the most effective ways to get rid of animals is to compost them properly. So, and people do, like large facilities do take meat and bones because it's better to put it into a compost pile than it is the landfill. So as far as just getting something that's plant-based, you would have to contact people. I want to say the city's compost is just plant-based. So if that's something that is really important to you, you might go through the city to get their compost.
If you are adding like organic matter, like you know, cardboard and stuff like that, would it still be considered plant-based? A. B, how do you know that the cardboard that you're using doesn't have any microplastics?
So I wish you guys can see me, but can you see me?
Oh yeah, no, we can see you, and we do have a couple more questions as well.
Okay, so when you take a piece of paper, say you got your cardboard, right, and it has your food grease on it, so you want to compost it instead of recycling it, which recycling cardboard, if you can, is a really good way to go because in Missouri, it actually gets recycled, which is really great. So you take say there's a label on it, right? And you take the label and you peel the label off. If the label looks like it has these it looks like plastic strands, like when you pull it apart, it doesn't rip or pull apart easily. It kind of stretches.
Oh, like vinyl, kind of?
Yes, that can be a sign that there is plastic in your paper.
Okay.
But now I was reading that a lot of companies are trying to switch to a more plant-based. Like a lot of people for a while were worried about inks. Like, how can I put newspaper and cardboard with lots of inks in it? From what I was reading is that a lot of inks now have been mandatory to be switched over to soy-based inks.
Oh, great.
So, you don't have to worry about that anymore and that they'll be fine in your compost pile. And microorganisms, they can take a little bit of contamination through ink.
Yeah, like
a large amount of it.
Like with, for instance, cartons of milk, the carton has wax on it, but because the compost is heating up to a certain temperature, that kind of, it does away with the wax, right?
Yes. But so what's really important with this part is like the shredding part. Okay. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. I wonder if I have.
Oh, okay. Let's answer some questions before we get to that.
Okay.
So Danielle Hartzler asks, how often should I be turning my compost pile?
As often as you can, a minimum of once a week. If you can turn your compost pile once a week, you will have compost in 1 to 2 months.
Teresa asks, if you have a very large stack of wood chips and very little green product and manure, can you use liquid nitrogen from the farm store, spray it on as you water?
No. That will kill your microorganisms.
That kind of ties into, we have one more question, but I wanted to just circle back. That kind of ties into questions 9 and 10 in regards to the nitrogen rich compost and whether or not you can add flavored coffee grounds, etc., because, you know, coffee provides nitrogen.
Yes. So you can add flavored coffee grounds. It's all based on amount, right? If you're getting 5-gallon buckets twice a week from a coffee place, and they have a bunch of, like it says, you know, artificial flavoring and synthetic flavoring or whatever, and that's the only thing you're feeding your pile, then you might come into a little bit of an issue depending on how much artificial, you know, what they're actually using in that. But normally, like with the amount of like 1 cup a day, or your, you know, small amount that you're putting in there, you're going to be fine. The artificial flavoring is not going to hurt your pile. It's going to be more beneficial that you're giving it the coffee grounds than not.
So circling back to Teresa's question in regards to using liquid nitrogen, I just want to ask Teresa, would you be using the liquid nitrogen to break down that large stack of wood chips and green product, or what do you think, Justine?
So any sort of synthetic nitrogen added to a compost pile, it will kill the microorganisms. I'm realizing that I need to do a workshop on soil and how microorganisms work with soil, because we're going to go off on a little tangent just so we can answer this question. There is a relationship with microorganisms and plants, and how the microorganisms and the bacteria and how they're converting the nutrients in the soil to make it plant ready, right? And so what happens is we have created these synthetic fertilizers that when you put them in the ground and the plant learns to take up these synthetic nitrogen, it loses its relationship and its ability with the microorganisms. And also that nitrogen is like detrimental to the microorganisms. It kills them because it's not in this like form for them to work with. So any sort of high nitrogen product is not needed in a compost pile. If you have a huge stack of wood chips and you want them to decompose, this is the fastest way to get your wood chips decomposed, is you introduce saprophilic fungi. And these saprophilic fungi, they're found in the forest. They may even be in your compost pile. I don't know. I mean, all the compost piles that I've seen, all the wood chips piles that I've seen in Missouri are extremely lucky, because I've seen almost all of these mushrooms in there, all these fungi in there. And when you see this, it is a beautiful and happy story and success, and you should be dancing around your pile because you know that you have some of the greatest decomposers in your pile right now, and they will slowly break down the compost pile. What I do is when I see these little guys, you want to be really gentle because you can't break them. Like, they're living, they're connecting themselves through their strands and pulling it in and slowly decomposing the carbon. You want to take a little bit of them and you can put them in your compost pile. Like, you can put it at the bottom of your pile and let them just kind of hang out there, especially in a finished compost pile. Put them in there so that it inoculates the pile over time and you get a really good fungal balanced compost pile. So I think it was Teresa, find some of this mushroom fungi right here, throw it all over your compost pile, keep it moist so that they can work, and watch them slowly decompose the pile. It is beautiful.
Brilliant. Okay. And then we have another question going back to the plant-based compost from Josh. He asks, does Springfield Composting do any bokashi composting to help break down meat, bone, and other products that don't traditionally go into the backyard compost?
Our executive director was doing an experiment with bokashi right now. I'll have to ask for her update. I'm going to have a meeting with her tomorrow. And you know what? I will put an update on that on our social media. I'll have her do that so you guys can see how her bokashi fermentation is going. I've heard from a couple of my friends who have done it that they have really enjoyed it. That it is a good alternative to just, throwing all their things that they don't want to throw in their backyard pile in it. I will say just real quick with bokashi is that liquid that comes out of it, please do not put that on your plants.
Oh, why?
I know they sell it as that, but remember like the anaerobic, the bad guys, right? So if you're pouring on a liquid and it smells like super funky, and you're like, oh my gosh, this smells really bad, that is anaerobic bacteria. So what you could do with that liquid instead of putting it, there's a chance if you put that directly on your plants, you could kill them. So what you want to do is you can take that liquid and you can like put it on a wood chip pile, right? And try to spread it out as much as you can and see if it can incorporate, if it can get some beneficial bacteria into it. Or you can run it through like a bubble system. Some people have had success where they pour it out, put it into like a little bubbler that they get from like a fish store into a bucket and start forcing air through it. And you can put in a little bit of like molasses or some like, fish oil and see if you can start feeding the beneficial guys. And then once you bubbled it for a few, like for 24 hours, and it's starting to not smell as ammonia-y, then you can put that on your plants.
Okay. So there's a couple of follow-up questions, and I just wanted to tie them into the questions that we already had. So it seems as though we've answered question number 12. Why can't you add meat to compost piles?
Yes. So real quick, you can add meat to compost pile. I live on the farm here and all of our stuff goes on the compost pile and it all gets decomposed. You just have to be careful. Meat is a high nitrogen content, right? So if you're putting meat in your pile, you want to make sure that you're always covering it up with carbon and you're making sure that it's like, if your pile is like 4 feet high and it's really active, you're checking its temperature, it's like at 130 and you have a chicken that you just made, you can open your pile up to the very center of it, throw the chicken in there with a little bit more of some mulch and close it and see how long it takes that to decompose. You'll be surprised of how fast you can decompose that, plus without vectoring any sort of flies or animals. A dog is not going to go into a compost pile that is 160 degrees, I promise. My dog tried to do that once and he never went into the pile again. Literally burned their nose.
Wow.
So that's another thing why it's so important to like try to get the temperature up. And I promise you, it's way easier than you think it is to get the temperature up.
Yeah. And so
compost pile after this successfully, and you get that compost thermometer that I'm going to recommend to you, and you get it to 135, please take a picture of it and send it to me or put it on social media. I just love seeing it because I taught a bunch of community gardeners, the Springfield Community Gardens, right? And they're, a lot of the community garden leaders are in their retired age. And they're all looking at me like, I can't do this. There's no way I can build this pile and get it up to that temperature. I promise you, like a month later, I was getting pictures from all these community garden leaders like, look at my compost. It's 135. I can't believe it. Because all it takes is this nice layering system of carbon and nitrogen and water, and things start to happen. The microorganisms start to reproduce rapidly, which heats up the pile. So pretty cool.
So we have 2 questions in the Q&A, and then we can get back to the script questions. Teresa asked as a follow-up, there's a place on the other side of Joplin that sells mushroom compost. Could that be added to the wood chips?
Yes. That would be amazing. With mushroom yes. It'd be interesting to see how well it starts decomposing, but it definitely can't hurt. So add that in there. And remember, mushrooms need moisture to really thrive, right? Because when you go mushroom hunting, you find them in moist, like, shady areas. So just kind of think of the environment that they like. So just remember to keep your wood chips moist when you're adding that in.
And so Celestine asks, so if the quality of the compost is important, how should you select starter soil to start your seeds, especially if you're having organic plant-based produce that is important to you?
Yes. So when you're starting seeds, it is actually really good to use a compost mixture in your seed starts because you're going to have stronger and healthier seeds. So thanks for bringing that up. A lot of people think that they have to have this sterile potty mix for their seed starts, and that's not what you want anymore. We're learning that we don't want that. If you can actually inoculate your seeds in like a compost tea, that is like the best thing for them. That's why my whole mission right now is to teach people how to make compost at home, because I truly believe that the individual making compost at home, it's going to give you the best quality compost, really. I can give you some sources that I know who make really good compost, like Troy from Living Roots Compost Tea, which I have his information at the end of this presentation. You can directly buy compost from him, and I 100% guarantee you that it's going to be incredible compost because he makes it himself and he analyzes it underneath a microscope to guarantee what he's giving you. And remember, like I said, you only need a little bit if it's really good. So I would just invest in people who are making good compost. So that Dr. Elaine Ingham certification course that I was telling you about, there are soil and compost makers throughout the country now who follow her like composting methods, and that's who I would go with. Those people I've noticed are making the best compost and have the highest quality. So if you can find them around the country, Troy is one of them from Living Roots Compost Tea, and that's really important to you. Invest in those individuals who their career is making the compost.
Brilliant. Going back to the questions, kind of circling back to the paper, we didn't answer these questions. So what paper products can you and can't you add, and pizza boxes?
Yes, pizza boxes, they're great. Add them to a pile. When you're adding paper, that's what I want to tell you real quick, is that it needs to be shredded, or you need to rip it up into pieces unless you're adding it at the very bottom of your compost pile, which is where I recommend adding paper and cardboard, is creating a nice thick layer of all your cardboard at the very bottom of your pile. So as you're creating your compost pile, it doesn't just leach into the ground and you lose it. The very first year that I ever made compost, I got so excited and I had this beautiful compost pile, and within 2 months, it completely disappeared into the ground. Because what I was making it was like this really compacted, bad, like gravelly area, and it loved it. It needed it, and it just like took it all in, and I lost it. But at the same time, I made that whole area like so much better. So now I've learned when I'm making compost and I want the finished product for myself, I do a very thick layer of mulch and then a nice thick layer of cardboard.
So this, what you have on the slide here, it has all the ratios. Is it in order for how you should place the materials?
No, let's go over that real quick. So I might be able to answer some more questions for individuals with some of the next slides. So let's go over some slides real quick and then we'll do some more questions. So making it easier on yourself, organizing your carbon. This is like, I love doing this. The woman who has a bunch of carbon, build a storage area for it. Put it all in there, make sure it has airflow. Like this picture, there's gaps in between those bricks so that it has airflow. And you will need to go in there and like, turn your carbon source so it doesn't get all smelly and anaerobic-y. But you can inoculate your carbon source this way, like we we're talking about with that saprophytic fungi that you can find in the forest, or with some mushroom compost that you buy. So build your storage area so then every time you go out to your pile and you put your bucket on your pile, you can grab from your storage area really easily and throw it on top of your food waste, your food scraps, so they're never showing. This is really important. So here are the good guys. Search for these guys. They smell really good too. That's another way you can know you have the right thing. Remember, because sometimes people get confused with, well, am I looking at anaerobic bacteria or am I looking at saprophytic fungi? The saprophytic fungi are much bigger. You see those strands and they smell good. Anaerobic guys smell bad. Okay, importance of temperature. We talked about this already, how it kills the seeds. It shows you that you have the correct mixture of carbon and nitrogen ratio when your pile is getting up to 140 degrees. It's making it safe to use manures from like from your, well, manures from like if you have chickens, right? Or if you have small livestock animals that you know you're not feeding them a bunch of dewormers, you can put their manure in your compost pile. I have chickens and I love putting their manure in my compost pile. It really helps my compost, like it just kicks it up a notch. It gets it hot really quickly and it helps decompose all the carbon material really quickly. And then compost, so compost goes through a stage, right? When you say you're throwing on your compost, and like you should, it depends, like I'm a household of, I got me and my husband and my baby, and we can fill up a 4x4 compost pile in about, oh my gosh, 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. But we eat a lot of vegetables, and so we have a lot of scraps. And but you should be able to fill it up in like a month. And then once you get it filled up, and even as you're filling it though, even when it's just halfway and you stick your compost thermometer in there, you will see that it's still getting hot and that you're still wanting to turn it. So as you're building your compost pile and you get it all the way to 4x4 and it's really active and you're really proud, you just threw all your garden scraps in there, it's ready to go. You will see a flux from it going up really, really high, where it sits at a high temperature for 3 to 5 days and you let it do its thing, and then it starts dipping down again. This range is really important because you're getting all these different types of microorganisms and bacteria. At each different level, different type of organisms and bacteria come into the pile, and you want all of them to come in because they break down different things. And so as they come in and your compost pile peaks and then you start seeing it go down again, as it's going down, that's when you know, okay, it's time to turn it. And we'll go over how you do that. And then you'll see it go back up again because you know it's working really well. And then it will go down again. Then you know, okay, it's time to turn it again. So just know this fluctuation of up and down is really good for your pile. And then it does completely bottom out and it goes into a curing stage because there's no longer high sources of nitrogen in there. So at that point, you should see something that starts to resemble compost. And you want to keep it at that curing stage for a couple weeks because you never, ever, ever want to put hot compost on your garden. You can kill your plants. So, okay, so when you're taking its temperature, you want to check in 3 different locations and take the average. As you can see in this top diagram, that the hottest point is going to be in the center, and that's why we turn it to mix that all up. And then we recommend RioTemp compost thermometers. You can get them on Amazon. They are so sturdy. They have lasted me years and years and years, and I really love supporting this company. So I recommend buying one of these. It's really fun too to go out there and check your temperature, especially if you have kids. My son loves to do that. So the soil food web, this is what we're trying to grow. We are growing the soil food web in your compost pile, so then you have the best food web for your plants. This is right here. This is where it's at. It starts with the nematodes, the bacteria, the protozoa, the arthropods. We want to make sure that we have a really good foundation of these guys so we can start attracting other beneficials into our garden and feeding the plants in the best way that we can. I got a little image of a nematode on the right, so you can see underneath the microscope, kind of see what we're looking for whenever we're looking at compost. We check for nematodes. Nematodes eat bacteria, and then they release it in a form that the plant can take up, right? The plant has this relationship with all these microorganisms. It just doesn't take up the nutrients all by itself unless it's what some people believe, synthetic fertilizers, which do more harm to soil life. It makes the plant reliant on the synthetic fertilizers and it loses its ability to have that relationship with microorganisms. So now your plant is always reliant on synthetic fertilizers, and it makes it to where they're more susceptible to disease and pests because the plant has a relationship with fungal and all these different bacteria. And when you take that away, it breaks its shield. It breaks its ability to take care of itself in stressful environments. So on the left here, you can see a nematode, what looks like in water. And then on top of that is an air pocket right here. And then you have sand, silt, and clay, which is what's making up the soil. Here is a root from a plant. And you can see how all this is working together to give this plant the nutrients that it needs. It needs all of this to happen to be at its healthiest form. And you provide all of this through good compost. How are we doing on questions and such?
No questions right now.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to keep going. So compost adds fungal hyphae along with other beneficials to soil, helping it fight against root-feeding nematodes and diseases. Synthetic fertilizers, overworking the soils, and it kills microorganisms. It's breaking the natural defense shield like I was talking about. So this is a really cool photo of fungal hyphae trapping a root-feeding nematode. So just let you guys know that there are more beneficial nematodes in the world than there are like the bad guys. Root-feeding nematodes make up the smallest percentage of nematodes, right? And the only reason why a root-feeding nematode will ever hurt your plant is because you're lacking the diversity in the soil that should take out that. Like this fungal hyphae that traps a nematode and kills it. It doesn't allow it to get to the root. And without that fungal hyphae, it now can penetrate into the root of the plant. So another couple, and on the left, you'll see the a fungal hyphae strand. We look for this in compost as well to kind of help gauge how much fungal hyphae we have. I just want to let you guys know that depending on the plant and depend on what type of compost you want. If you're looking to plant a bunch of perennials and trees, you want to lean towards a more fungal dominated compost because trees and perennials have a better relationship with fungal dominated compost than they do with bacteria dominated compost. Now, if you have annuals, you want to have you could have a little bit higher percentage of bacteria compost than fungal because not all annual plants have a relationship with the fungal world. Brassinaceae, your broccoli and cauliflower, they don't have a relationship with the mycorrhizal. They don't need it. So they like to have a more dominant compost. So what I always tell people that if you're just wanting to plant a forest or a perennial garden, look more for a fungal dominated. But if you're wanting to do a mixture of both, just get a good balance. Make sure you have fungal and bacteria compost and all your microorganisms involved as well. Let's see. So a little bit more understanding soil. Microbes. Microbes feed the plants, right? Because the microorganisms eat the bacteria, they release it into a plant, the form that the plants can then take up. They have a whole relationship together. The plant then goes, we humans either eat the plant or our animals that we consume eat the plant, right? Healthier animals, healthier humans, healthier plant, healthier humans. Then we take our leftovers, put it back into the composting system to feed the soil, to then feed more microbes. This is the circle that we want to create in our backyard and in our life and that the Compost Collective wants to create. So let's go through building a compost pile really quick. This is straw. Straw is really good for protozoa. They like straw. So we always put a little bit into our piles. You want to get it wet first because you probably know straw can be very dry and it can take up a lot of moisture. So cardboard layer. We use bike boxes here because they're really big and they're a good base layer. See, there's mulch underneath there and then cardboard. Now we cover it again with mulch. Dried weeds. If you have a bunch of like, if you have Bermuda grass, which is like all over Missouri, and Bermuda grass just was horrible for me in my gardens there. I like to let it sit out in the sun and dry and try to like get it to where it's like as dead as possible. And then I put it in the middle or at the bottom of my compost pile so I can be sure to get it really, really hot and kill it. Water each layer. So it's really important to water each layer of the compost pile, because remember, if you build it all the way up to 4 feet high and you put your water at the top, it's not going to get to the center of the pile, because they found out that when it's 4 feet, it can protect itself from torrential downpours. So if you get to the very top of your pile and you're like, oh crap, I forgot to water it, you can dig a hole as far down as you can and put your hose down there and water it that way. But the best way to water it is each layer. Each layer, sprinkle it with water. Chop up your materials. As you're going in, make sure you're layering it out nice and flat. You're spreading it out kind of like, you're spreading icing on a cake. There is a study done where they did different diameters of scraps. And they found that when you shredded it up the smallest you possibly can, it decomposed faster, which makes sense, right? Because these microorganisms are itty bitty bitty bitty, and they're having to do a lot of work. So if you have a big old broccoli stalk in there, it's going to take them a long time to decompose that. But if you can shred it up and chop it up into smaller pieces, it's going to be able to break that down faster. So chopping up your compost is really beneficial for you. I mean, your food scraps. Inoculating it. If you have some finished product already laying around, you can throw it in. Or if you have an area of your yard where you're like, this is really good soil, and you see like a lot of different plants growing in it, and it smells really good, you can take some of that soil and throw it into your compost pile and inoculate it, and that will help your compost pile get hot faster. And the decomposition part will go faster as well. Inoculating more, we're covering it up. Remember, each layer, they're covering it up to make sure all the carbon and the nitrogen is touching. Again, we're mixing in all these different types of carbon materials with our food scraps. This was filled with garden waste and food scrap waste. Just to let you know, that was their nitrogen source. Then at the very end, this is what gives composting a bad rap. This is so, so, so important. If you're composting in the city, even if you're composting out on the farm, you have to always cover your compost pile. And they call it a bio cover, which just means you're covering with organic material. So you're covering it with, mulch or straw or leaves. You have to protect it. And you want to do a pretty thick layer, like 6 to 5 inches of covering it. You don't want any food scraps showing. This is what keeps flies out of your compost pile and rodents. And this is what makes sure that it's like nice and tucked away so that it can do its thing. Okay. So diagnosing problems and knowing the solutions. Number 6, I believe, there was a question about, can you read number 6 to me?
Yeah, so number 6 is, what are some compost red flags to keep a lookout for?
Okay, perfect. This is it right here. And these are the solutions. Now, one thing that I always tell people is that, say the pile has a bad odor. All right. And the solution could be that it may be too wet or too tight or too much nitrogen, and that you will need to turn the pile and add dry carbon. But you don't necessarily want to do all of those at once, right? If it has a bad odor, you want to open it up and see, okay, this looks too wet, right? Because you're going to do the wet test, and you can say, okay, if it's too wet, then I need to add more carbon to it. So you turn it and you add more carbon, and then that's it. Now, if you come back in a week and you're like, oh my gosh, I still added more carbon, it's still smelling bad, what's next, right? Then you can say, all right, there's way too much nitrogen in here. So let's reassess. We're going to add a lot more carbon to our pile. We're not going to add, we're going to really turn it again and make sure that I get this to go away. So just do one solution at a time, and don't try to do all of them at once, because then you're going to never know what was exactly wrong with your pile. So if no composting is seen to be taking place, normally it's moisture, like I said earlier. or you need to add more nitrogen to the pile, which you'll tell if it's really wood chippy. Then you know, okay, it's not getting breaking down. Just to be mindful of when you add leaves and straw. Remember, leaves, they can compact really easily together, right? And they can have an area that doesn't get oxygen really easily. So I always like to mix mulch and leaves together. Or if leaves are my only source, I try to let them dry out in like the sun for a while, and then add them to my compost pile if I'm doing really wet food scraps, and then add water slowly, because like I said, leaves can get really slimy and hold moisture really well. So just kind of be mindful of that when you're using leaves. Not enough moist, not hot enough, but moist enough. The question on number 7, I think, can you read that out loud?
Yeah, one moment. We also have another question in the Q&A.
Okay.
So number 7, what is the compost pile, or what if the compost pile doesn't heat up?
Okay. So if the compost pile is not heating up, then which is like number 7, not hot enough, your ratio could be off and your moisture could be off. So like I said, you might not have enough nitrogen content to your carbon. So you want to make sure that you, when you're opening it up, you step back and you look at it. You're like, okay, I got lots of carbon here. I only have a handful of nitrogen. And I'm throwing it into this big old pile of wood chips. That's not going to do, right? And so what is heating up your pile exactly is that the microorganisms are reproducing in your pile really quickly. It's like when we go for a run and we're working out our body and we start sweating and we get hot, very similar to microorganisms who are in there reproducing and growing rapidly and consuming, and they're going through this process that they're putting off the heat doing that, right? So the more material, the more nitrogen source you have for them to do that with, that's what's heating up the pile. If that makes sense. So if it's not heating up, it could possibly be too small and it not have enough nitrogen, and it might not be wet enough. So you need to check all 3 of those. And then the same for the last one, number 4, moist enough and smells fine, but not enough decomposition. There's not enough nitrogen to fuel a decomposition process. So feed it some fresh green material and then check back and see.
So one of the questions, Justine, is, and this is an anonymous person, is there any reviving a 1 to 2 year old food scraps pile that hasn't been properly composted until now?
Yes, sometimes those piles make the best compost, just to let you know. So don't get discouraged. You could go in there and like I said, there is some benefits of cold composting because it can grow the fungal hyphae. Like fungal dominated compost is very delicate, right? Like when you're turning your pile a lot, you might not get a lot of fungal dominated compost because when you're turning it, you're breaking the fungal hyphae up because they're so delicate. But when you just let it sit for a long time, they can grow and get really big strands in there. And the bigger, longer, thicker strands you have, the more fungal dominated compost you're going to get. So take that compost that you have, that you found, that's been sitting, and just slowly start incorporating it into your new pile. That's what I would do. Like set it to the side and have it as like a source for you to add in, and then start your new one right next to it or in whatever area you want to start, and just kind of slowly start pulling from that to add into your pile. You can revive any compost pile.
And then I have a question. So I grew up in a very rural part of Missouri where we didn't have trash or compost or any sort of services provided. And so we had like a huge burn pile. Can you use burned materials to add to the compost?
Great question. I get that quite a bit actually, is can I use ash, right? Because that's like what you have from the past. Yeah. I mean, sometimes you have biochar, like that, those thick chunks of wood that are black. that is biochar. And you want biochar to actually go through the composting process so that it can get inoculated. That's the best thing for it. So ash, you just have to be really careful, because I don't know if you've ever gotten ash wet, but it can turn into like a clayey material, right? And like really soupy. And you don't want that to happen into your pile. So ash has the ability to stick to each other really well, like clay particles do. And so I always advise people that I don't put ash in my compost. I just like dig a hole and put it in that hole. And then kind of have holes throughout my land of ash or in a big pit. Or if you want, like if you don't, say you don't have that much ash, you only have it like in the summer and like maybe a little bucket from barbecuing or something, you can slowly sift ash on the compost. Just make sure you use a little bit. If you notice that your compost pile is like really moist and smelly, then stop putting the ash in. That could be holding the moisture.
Oh, okay. Awesome. That's it on the questions.
Okay, let's continue. So I have some examples of different types of piles for your area. So there is a question about, can I compost in the city? And in Springfield, you can compost in the city of Springfield as long as it is not a nuisance or vectoring any sort of like insects or no one's complaining, right? And no one will complain about your pile as long as it is properly built. It's like in, your pallet area, it's completely covered with wood chips, and it's not, you're not breeding flies, right? And you won't breed flies when it's completely covered. So, but this way I'm showing you here is more for like a farming way. It's a windrow on the left. And that's if you have a very large amount. So if anyone's like out here and they have land and they plan on composting a large amount, I definitely recommend doing a windrow style. And then you can kind of see the layering system on the other one, which I like. This is the most common one that we teach people, is that you have 2 side-by-side bins and you fill up one side, and when it gets to the point where you've had your high heat cycle, it's starting to go down again, then you flip it over to the other side, and then you can either go back and forth if you want, or you can flip it over to the other side and then keep it in that one side and just kind of turn it in that one side while you're building the other one on the other side. This is a really cool one too. I like the wire and wood cages. They're easy to set up and take down, and they provide lots of airflow, which I really love. Same with this one here. They use recycled material. These images were from Rodale Book of Composting, which is a really great resource. I highly recommend their book. This is the one that we build for people as well. Same system, and then the one that has the roof over it on the far end, that's where they're going to hold their finished product so that the rain doesn't wash it away. This is what we built for the community gardens, all made out of recycled material and cost them nothing, which is really great. And then we put signage on it too. See, that looks nice with signs so people know where things should go. And you can see all those leaves are covering up. There's no food scraps exposed. This one I really like too, really great airflow to this. And then you just take out those boards when you want to turn it. Now, this one is going to be my favorite type of composting, is doing a hardware cloth, because it is very easy to turn. And it decomposes, what I've seen, the fastest, and it gets the best aeration in this form. And it can be cheap. I mean, hardware cloth can be a little expensive, but once you have it, it can last a long time. Another example of how you should be layering your compost pile here. See, it's 4x4, and you can layer and dry your greens, your soil, your water. You just keep layering it all the way to the very top. Okay. There's a video here I want to show you that I did. Now, if you've been to one of my workshops before, you've probably seen this video, but this is some of the farmer incubators a couple years ago making a compost pile in a hardware cloth. And they had a bunch of tomato cuttings, and they had food scraps and mulch and straw. And what they did is I taught them how to use those bins as a measuring scoop, basically, like kind of like when you're making a cake. You want to measure things out. And so they would put all the material in those bins, and then they would throw it in there, right? So he would only fill the wood chips up like a quarter of the way or halfway in those bins, but then you would fill it all the way up with some with straw or with the tomato with his green material. It's a really, really good way to measure. And then someone's watering it at every layer. He's making sure that it lays flat, pushing it out to the ends. Right then he was inoculating it with some old compost. And they build this all the way up to the very top. I want to say it took them about 35 to 40 minutes to make this pile, right? And they had their materials around them and they were like ready for it. They, you know, saved up their garden clippings, some food scraps. So if you're at home gardener and you're getting ready to clean your garden, this is a really good way to compost your food scraps. But you can also do this at home you don't have to fill it all up at once either. Like right then, he could just cover it with wood mulch and he could be done for that week. Then he can come back and fill it up some more. You don't have to do it all at once, but what you do have to do is you have to poke it and turn it throughout the time that you were building it. Any questions while we're watching this video of them build this lovely compost pile?
No questions right now.
Okay. Trying to think of some other, we've gone over so much. Having a machete on hand is really, really useful when you want to chop up all the material. That's something great to have. You would think that she's adding too much water, but whenever the pile heats up so hot, it will evaporate that water. So that's why you got to constantly be checking it to make sure that it has enough and it has what it needs, because like I said, the microorganisms, it can be used up in the pile through the heating process. And you can kind of see now the layering. You can see the nice layering system that's forming here with the greens and the browns and the straw. And they're going to go all the way to the very top. And then I wish I would have got a picture. I totally forgot when I went back and checked on it in just like a week, it had already decomposed. It was probably down about 70%. And by the time this will be a finished product and ready to go on your garden, it could decompose by half. Just to let you know, because right now it's nice and fluffy. It has lots of air pockets in it. And then the gravity will, and rain and watering it over time will push out all those air pockets and it will get deflated and it will get pushed down. So turning it is another, it kind of fluffs it up again. But yeah, this will probably give you about 1 cubic yard of compost, maybe right here. All right, they're done. All right, so turning, what was question 8?
Question 8, give me one moment. Question 8, what do you do if the compost gets too hot?
You turn it. That is a very, very important question. So just to let you know, compost piles, sometimes they can get too hot if you put a lot of nitrogen in there and your ratio is really good and you got a perfect environment. They can reach up to 170 degrees. The woman with the large wood chip pile, it depends on how large your wood chip pile is, but if it's over 6 feet, you need to watch out for temperature. You do not want your pile to go over 170 degrees. Once it goes over that, it can start producing the anaerobic bacteria that are at the center that are not getting oxygen, will start producing alcohol and forms of alcohol, and those can catch on fire. It's really common for composting facilities to have a mulch fire, because when they stack their mulch piles up, to 10 or 15 feet, multiple stories high, it gets super hot in there and it starts producing chemicals that ignite. So that's why you want to make sure to turn your pile. If you see that it's going over 160, you want to turn your compost pile that day. So that's how you get to cool down. Again, I've been telling you guys turning is really important. This just kind of shows you how to turn it. You want to flip it inside out. and it's also a great workout. Here is a video of my friend Troy from Living Roots. It's a little bit shaky, but he's showing you how to turn his the hardware cloth part. So he takes off the top and the outside layers, and he's going to set those aside. And then he transfers the hot core materials. Some of them go on the bottom, not all of them, just a little bit. And then what he's going to do is he's going to take the outside layers that did not get super hot in the core, and he's going to put those into the center. And then he's going to take the hot materials that were in the center, and he's going to cover the whole outside with it. Like I said, so he's basically flipping it inside out, because what's going to happen is all those microorganisms that are in the center are now being put on the outside, and they're going to go towards the center of the pile where there is like some nitrogen and sources that they may have not got to before. This is definitely a workout. So I always tell people that it's more fun when you do it with your friends and family. And the same goes for like if you have the pallet system set up, you want to scrape off that outside layer, put it to the side, scrape off the inside layer, put it to the side, and then put it back together how I just discussed. So it's good to have, 2 separate piles. This is the most ideal way to turn your pile. You don't have to do it this way if you're not capable of doing it. If all you can handle is going in there and like sticking the pitchfork in your pile and lifting it up like this all over, that is okay too. You just want to really make sure that you're getting as much air in there as possible. Some people will take really thick PVC pipes and they'll put it in the center of their compost pile, and they'll like blow in air through it with they'll have holes all in it, and they'll blow air with like a leaf blower. That is one form I've seen. So however you need to get oxygen in the pile, just do it the best you can. It doesn't have to be like this. So this is why finished compost should smell like the forest floor, is because we're basically mimicking nature. That's all there is to it. With how the green leaves fall down to the forest floor, which can be covered with the previous fall leaves. You have green leaves and fall leaves, so you have your carbon and nitrogen source right there with a little bit of water, mixing it together, plus all the microorganisms and fungal and bacteria that are down there, and they make the perfect compost. That's why when you go into the forest and you put your hands in it, it smells so good. They're making a perfect product. You can take some of the forest floor and take it back to your compost pile and put it in there too to help inoculate it. I don't think anyone's interested with vermicomposting. If you are, let me know and I can go over a little bit of that with you. Application. So a 2-inch layer followed by seeds or plants like we talked about. Compost works best with living roots. Best applied in the spring, summer, and fall so that you can get those living roots into it. Can be used as mulch around trees and shrubs. Never put compost in a hole when you're planting a tree. The big no-no. What happens is it doesn't encourage the tree roots to go out into the native soil. It can promote the roots to wrap around the tree. And so you don't want to do that. You just want to top dress trees with compost. Don't put it in the hole. Make sure your compost is cured, that it has sit long enough and that it smells good and that it's not hot, and that you don't see any food scraps left over in your compost. It looks like a 70% dark chocolate bar. It smells like the forest floor, and it's nice and crumbly in your hands. This is how you know you have a good finished product. There has been some research shown that you can use uncured compost on squash and corn recently. So if you just can't wait this summer and this spring or something, you want to use it on, you can use it on squash and corn, and they do okay with it. Side dressing plants to suppress weeds. Like we said earlier, you can use it in your seedling mixture and also on your house plants. Here's a cool example of compost that I love to encourage now for lawn care instead of chemical lawn care. You can take it and like sift it really fine and then put it through like the applicator that you use to put seeds down and spread it out through your lawn and water it. And this is what my friend Troy from Living Roots did. And you can definitely see the difference here in the lawns that have been treated with the compost and haven't been treated with the compost. You can also use compost tea in that way. And then the healing powers of compost, it's like never ending with it. We're still finding out all the amazing things that it can do. Yeah. Do we have any questions right now?
No questions at this time.
Awesome. One of the big things for the gardeners is that one of the cool things with compost that people don't think about, the Compost Collective did a research project with some graduate students from MSU where we did 3 different types of compost and we grew green onions. And we were looking at the nutritional value in the final product of the green onions. And then we were looking at the soil's like nutritional level, like how well it created a biodiversity soil while it was also giving its energy to the plant. And we found out that compost made with food waste had the highest nutrient dense food on top and the most diversity in the soil. Compost made with just lawn clippings was second. And then when we just use like a mulch and leaf covering on top to protect it from the sun, it had the least nutrients and biodiversity in the soil. And when they published this like 3 or 4 years ago, it was really, really cool to now prove that when you apply healthy compost made from food scraps to your garden, you are producing a healthier product for your consumption. And this research study proved it. So all in all, microbes rule the world. Healthy soil microbiome equals healthy plants and animals equals healthy human equals a happy planet. That's what it's all about. And that's why I love teaching it. And that's why I start with compost. So a little thing to remember is that you always want to keep your food scraps covered with carbon in a bio cover or a tarp if you don't have enough carbon material. It keeps unwanted bugs and animals out. Keep the pile at the right temperature to kill weeds and suppress diseases, nothing above 160 to 165. If it gets too hot, you start killing the good bacteria and you can have nitrogen loss as well. And then it also, when you have hot compost, you can ensure that you're making a very healthy compost. And do not forget to turn your pile and check for moisture as you're doing it. I recommend Teaming with Microbes. If you've never read it, it's a really, really good book. I am currently reading it again for like the 4th time because I really love it. It's really motivating. Get that book. Regenerative Agriculture by Richard Perkins. He has a great YouTube channel where he does all different style of techniques for market gardening to just like to composting. He's a compost guru as well. We also have a 7-page document of recommended reading material that we can send to you if you would like. And then this is Living Roots Compost Tea. My friend Troy, he has a podcast now called What's Brewing, and it's all about soil microbiome and making really good compost and compost tea and how to do it in your backyard. And then you can reach out to him for brew kits, or you could just make it like use his compost to make compost tea, or to just ask him to send you some really good compost so you could put it in your pile or put it in your houseplants or your seedling mix, however you want. But he is a trusted resource and the Compost Collective stands behind him. That's it. Happy composting, my little happy compost pile. And then thank you so much for supporting composting and being here with me. I love talking about it. You can reach out to me anytime in emailing it, and I will try my best to get back to you on social media. Yeah, is there any questions that I didn't answer or anything that's popping up for anyone right now that they want to go over?
There are no questions at this time. Oh, here we have one more question. Are there any YouTube channels that we should check out to help us learn more about creating healthy soil?
Creating healthy soil. Soil. So creating healthy compost. There's a couple more workshops that I did with the community gardens that you can go on their YouTube channel and watch. I think I have a couple really in-depth workshops where we talk about soil health and composting. As far as YouTube channels, man, so composting is one of those hard ones where everybody has their own take on proper composting, and I haven't watched all of the videos out there, obviously, so it's hard for me to know like who is good and what's not. That Richard Perkins, what I was telling you about, he has a YouTube channel, and I definitely recommend his channel and his composting videos. He is a Dr. Elaine Ingham graduate as well, so he knows all about the soil food web and promotes it. If you go into YouTube and you type in soil food web Dr. Elaine Ingham, anything by them I would trust and I would recommend.
Yeah, and then I did link in the chat. There is a link to the YouTube agriculture workshops if you'd like to look into further more of that stuff. There's also an exit poll. If you guys could fill that out, it's great and very useful. It helps provide the USDA with what content we are providing through this this platform.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. Like I said, feel free to message me or email me with any other questions anytime, and I'll try my best to get back to you.
Yay. And Justine, I hit you up on Instagram. So talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye, guys. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. Bye.